So hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are at today. It is so lovely to have you here with all of us to really dig in and think about what are the experiences that people are having, as many of us are working from home or going to school in a remote environment. And increasingly, how will that change as we look at hybrid environments? So as the accessibility evangelist, my name is Megan Lawrence, and I have learned several things about working from home and really building a culture of inclusion as we're doing this real time. And the first one is that community is more important than ever. We all want to belong to something bigger than ourselves. And so our friends, our family, our religious communities, but certainly our work communities have become incredibly important in the way that we stay connected. And being connected includes technology in a way that really is different than maybe what we've seen in the past. While I would have said I spent a lot of times on Teams before the pandemic, now I really spend a lot of time on Teams, whether that's meeting, chatting, or even sharing fun stories and pictures. And so we recognize that our technology empowers the way that we communicate. And we want to make sure that we're providing multiple ways for people to express who they are, build relationships with colleagues, and certainly maintain those relationships that are so important for collaboration and productivity. Now, I'm really excited by the panel that we have here today. So I have with me Leah Katz-Hernandez, who is the communications director working in the office of the CEO. We're also joined by Mike Bohan, the senior director of the Microsoft Human Factors Lab. Get ready to nerd out is all I have to say. And last but definitely not least is Alexa Laycock, who's the creative director at Roots in Rights, which is part of our Disability Rights Washington, that advocacy group that represents all people with disabilities here in our state, connected with a larger organization supporting people with disabilities. So I want to come back to that theme of connection, right? How are we creating and maintaining those relationships with our colleagues that really are at the core of how we build teams and honestly collaborate with one another? And I want to turn to you first, Leah, and hear a little bit of, okay, we've been working from home for 6 months. What are some of the lessons that you have learned about relationships, how you maintain them, and how technology might play a role in that?
Well, first, I want to say thank you so much. It is really a pleasure to be here with all of you wonderful fellow panelists. Thank you for that. So we'll just get right into it. I think it's interesting because working from home has certainly its pros and its cons. Among the pros are I get to wear stretchy pants every day. And among the cons are, well, we're having to figure out a new way of working and navigating the workplace. And in my experience as a deaf person, it has been a profound impact on me in terms of that transition. When I started off working remote, I was doing some remote work already, but this was a different experience. Working remotely and having that experience of being able to go into the office was different than transitioning to being 100% from home. That's a very different experience. And so I've learned some things along the way in the process of that. And the number one thing that I've learned really is, as the research shows, people who already had connections in the workplace and transitioned to work from home, those who had relationships established, which is interesting to me, have a better time with the transition. And that really highlights the importance of having those relationships at work in terms of being productive and successful at work. In my personal experience, I've been influenced by a couple of things here. One of them is, of course, that I am deaf, and being deaf in some ways is a class of, I don't know, a seniority type of disability. I mean, I can't hear anything. I mean, basically, I am sort of missing the scene in that way. And then on another level, foundational to a disability is communication access. Now, my mother, who is a social worker and worked for many, many years with deaf and hard of hearing clients, would always say that deaf is one of the most misunderstood disabilities. I'd like to add on to that and say that disability is very misunderstood in general. Now, disability in and of itself has a lot to do with communication, which of course includes a lot of potential for misunderstanding and a lot of required effort in clearing up those misunderstandings. So when working in the workplace, we have to work dually hard to navigate what I would call a hearing mainstream environment of figuring out how to communicate with coworkers, how to build relationships with other people. And a lot of that pressure and a lot of that challenge already existed, even though there are good accommodations available, we've got qualified interpreters, we've got access to things, that's great. But now that we've transitioned to working from home, we have an additional challenge here. Because that web of social networking with our professionals in the workplace has changed. And in the work from home environment, we're having to navigate different ways of connecting and communicating with people around us. So that's what I've learned really, is that it requires a lot of effort to connect and communicate with my colleagues. And to be honest with all of you, my experience has been so I have learned that it is so valuable to keep that connection of video on with my coworkers. It's important that I can see people so that I can communicate with people. I want to see your eyes. I want to see your eyebrows. I want to see your mouth. I want to see your facial expressions. Even though I don't use lip reading as a means of communication, I use sign language. What you say on your face is important to me. How you move your body language, how you move your face is important to me. So that is very helpful in terms of building relationships. And in terms of being successful at work.
You know, Leah, thank you so much for that commentary. As a person who lives with a mental health condition, I feel really similarly. The camera is really important to give me those cues that people are paying attention, that they are understanding the sentiment of what I'm talking about. And so I think, again, understanding communication and styles and being open to the question of, is this working? Is camera on, camera off? Don't ever be afraid to ask questions. Because we're all learning and really building this work from home culture of inclusion, like on the spot right now. And so I really want to turn to Mike and say, you know, we heard from Leah that we do see some really interesting research emerging on this topic. What are you guys seeing at the Human Factors Lab?
Sure. Thanks, Leah. We actually, what Leah's speaking of is actually so true. When we have been studying people's brains actually as they've been working remotely and in different ways, and the relationship part's super important, as Leah said. It's really interesting. What we found is that when people have established work relationships with folks already, and then they go into the remote work experience, while there are now technological layers in between people, they don't hit people as hard as if they had not developed those relationships before. So in other words, for folks that have to have only developed working relationships remotely and haven't had a chance to develop those in person, when they go back to working with a person, what we found is that their brain actually has to work really hard. And at first that surprised us, but we began to realize that what happens is when you're only working remotely, it's already more effortful on your brain because the idea of having to communicate through a flat, small screen instead of the real 3D world that we live in and that our brains have evolved to live in, that's more work already. And so we tend to be working around those issues, and we don't get to develop that level of communication and trust that you do in real life. And so, one of the potential things is that, for folks that have sort of come on board, for example, during, COVID-19 period right now, where they've only been able to establish relationships remotely, it may be more challenging for folks to establish them in person once they get back. And it kind of makes sense. It's like if you've met somebody online and that's the only way you know them, and then you decide to meet in person, then all of a sudden it's kind of stressful, right? It's a stressful experience. You developed all these preconceived ideas about this person that may or may not be true, and interaction styles and things like that. So that's one thing. And I think it's really interesting. We don't know what the long-term effects are. I think Leah's point's really good, which is we need to work to establish those relationships, and it may mean working a little bit harder. And so we don't know at this stage, if you've been away for a really long time, like, can you establish the levels of relationship you can in person? But
Yeah, so interesting. So this is a real phenomenon that's backed up by neuroscience that shows that creating and maintaining relationships is not only really important for the way that we perform at work, but it's a little more effortful. And so, it always makes me think that, taking that extra step, this is an opportunity where technology has an incredible role to play. So, just having an open chat where you have memes, like that is what Leah and I talked about this earlier. In the mental health community, we often see people say, I'm experiencing symptoms for the first time and I don't know how to express myself. And so memes and emojis and different ways of communicating are bringing us together and creating those bonds, even if we haven't had the opportunity to meet in person, or if we, have missed being with our colleagues for quite a while. But I have to say that working remotely can be really powerful for people, and that this is something that the disability community has asked for a very, very long time. So Alexa, how has the environment changed since COVID's come about?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. So yeah, I work for Rooted in Rights, which is the media advocacy team of Disability Rights Washington. And when offices started moving to remote work, there was a lot of outrage in the disability community because we had been advocating for work from home as an accommodation for years and been told that it just wasn't possible. The technology was not available and it just couldn't be done. And then in a matter of weeks, everyone was working remotely. And with Rooted in Rights, we produce videos and we also have a blog. And we actually were able to connect with a lot of the community and publish their thought pieces and their blog pieces that really summarized how they felt in this moment, that it felt really awful that work from home was only now an opportunity, that non-disabled people absolutely needed it. And so I think it really highlighted the fact that the disability community often has solutions to problems. And often already is thinking through how to provide accommodations and how to adapt to situations. And we just want to be included in the conversations more. We want to be included in the conversations about technology because we have great ideas and we have a wealth of people who are used to figuring out solutions to connection, to community. And have been doing it online for a while. So this moment, while obviously it is very stressful for all of us, has also been an opportunity for the disability community to say, hey, we actually have some solutions. And we do think technology can help us continue to connect.
Yes.
To me, this really goes back to nothing about us without us, right? I want to thank you for elevating the voice of people with disabilities, their lived experience, and let's be honest, their creativity, out of the box thinking, absolutely innovation. So to me, having people with disabilities in the workplace is the key to driving innovation over time. But you do have to be thoughtful about how you bring that voice into the company, both through inclusive hiring and programmatically. So one thing that we do here is we have the Accessibility User Research Collective, the AURC, which is 900 people with disabilities that we pay $50 an hour to give us feedback. So everything from, is this a good idea, to can you use this product in your daily life? Because we recognize that the disability voice is what's really going to set us apart and make sure that we're shipping products that are accessible and inclusive. And I think that as we, have so many IT managers on the line, we recognize you guys are the lifeblood of the company that really delivers that accessible and inclusive technology to make it possible for people with disabilities to do their job and to do it well, and to do it whether it's in person or if it's remote, because we want to give choice. And if we can empower choice through technology, that's when things start to get pretty exciting. But I want to dive into some tech tips, because we all have tips for like how we've managed our own environments, our ability to be connected and then also disconnect, because we do have to disconnect to recharge as well. Okay, so Leah, I'm going to start with you. What are your tips for the audience?
Sure. Well, first, I will say that really fundamental to deaf people and deaf culture is because there are so many experiences we have of being ignored, of really being left out and being told, oh, I'll tell you later, or, oh, what we said wasn't a really big deal, it's not worth telling you, which means we're often the last to know. We don't have access to a lot of things, captions, communication access. And so we have really a well of anxiety and stress that we've developed because we just don't know what's going on, which means that all of that collective experience within the deaf community turns into value, into what deaf people value, which is clear communication. Clear communication is so absolutely vital to deaf people's experience. And that's what I'd like to bring with you today is the better that you understand the importance of over communication versus under communication is so important, because as humans evolve over the many, many years that we have complex social communication systems in our society that really depend on 3D communication in meaningful in-person communication. And now all of a sudden we're thrust into a 2D environment. And so we need to go beyond that 2D experience to make sure that messages and communication are coming through clearly. So some tips that I have for you. Build on social connections through fun channels. But what I mean by that is the virtual version of the water cooler. For example, in Teams, you can create a fun channel where you can post memes, cute dog pictures, or things that you see along your walk. I also would like to say, give more feedback. So if a meeting is over, offer an opportunity to check in with each other. Ask how it went. Check in with email, follow up with people. Lean in deeper to that feedback loop. And thirdly, I will say, be open, be candid. I know that we're all going through a very stressful situation. Reach out, but I know that we often have to keep things on the business conversation and keep it professional, but also keep it personal as well. Have a fun lunch date with your colleagues, talk about things, how we're handling, how are you sleeping? These are things that are really going to be helpful in building connections with each other that will then go a long way in building a better workplace and building a more productive work environment.
Yeah, I love bring fun. Bring fun into the workplace, right? That's such a fundamentally important concept for all of us to keep
exactly
in our minds. And one of the things I've noticed lately is teams after a meeting will prompt me, which says, was this meeting inclusive? Did this meeting meet your business goals? And so I like that forward thinking as we begin at Microsoft to continue to understand what does a really good work from home environment look like? And that inclusion is key. It's key to the way that we communicate, that we stay connected, and we feel good about those relationships. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Alexa, and say, what are some of your technology tips? How are you creating your work from home environment?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. We've created a couple resources for accessible meetings, but we are a team we're all disabled on our team at Rooted in Rights, and people have different disabilities, and so they have different needs and different ways that they like to communicate. And so we've really strategized by talking with each other about, who really likes video, who needs an audio only option, who prefers to just type in the chat box. For our blind coworkers, it's really important that we say our name before we start speaking so that they know who's talking. Obviously, we know each other pretty well, so we're used to the sound of each other's voices, but in bigger meetings, it can get really overwhelming if a bunch of people are talking and you don't know who's saying what when. So that's a policy we've instituted in our larger organization to say your name when we're in a big all staff meeting before you speak. So we know who's talking and they can connect, with who's saying what. And yeah, we've really tried to balance the camera meetings with the text meetings, with our Slack channels, with our sort of video meetings so that we're not on a video call all day, but also so that we are interfacing for part of the day.
Yeah, it's amazing. Being on video all day is oddly stressful. I find myself looking at my own little picture a little bit too often, which creates this sort of funny, stressful moment for me. But turning it back to you, Mike, what are you sort of seeing come out of the lab, or maybe even personally, what do you do and how do you use technology?
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting because one of the things that makes us human is that we're social beings, and our brains have evolved to really detect subtle facial expression changes, gestures from people, and that really helps us in our communication. And so we desire to have that video on because that gives us more information in our communication. And the thing about it is, what we've found from studying people's brainwave patterns is that the staring at the screen actually adds another layer of effort for your brain. And this is what people have been referring to as meeting fatigue and so on. And what we've identified is that it's specifically down to having to concentrate a lot harder. And sustained concentration is the key. We're not used to when we talk in real life and we're in meetings in real life, we're not used to staring at everybody constantly, right? Like we sit here focused and we're staring at the screen, and that's not natural. And we have to, we have all this stuff going on. We have grids, we have different backgrounds, and our brain has to, even behind the scenes under our conscious awareness, it has to process all that information and filter it all out and figure out what are the things I need to concentrate on and what are the things that are most important. And those things can make you fatigued over time. So how do we get around that challenge? Well, as we create technological improvements, we'll break through that. And one of them is the together mode in Teams. That for sure is one way to reduce the effort put on your brain during meetings. And the reason is it unifies the background, it takes out all the extra visual noise, it puts everybody in the same space, and it also gives you an indication where people are looking. That's another big one, like eye contact and understanding where and who people are looking at is a really important part of communication. And that's kind of lost in the standard grid mode of these remote meeting applications. And so Teams helps with that. And then the other one is making sure you're giving yourself breaks, because your brain can sustain that high level of concentration for only so long, typically about 30 minutes or so before it starts to lose the ability to maintain that. So giving yourself freaking breaks, and especially if you're, if you're in a job where you have to be on back-to-back meetings, 2 hours, we see a big shift after 2 hours of work where your brain patterns start to look quite different, and that pattern of brain waves kind of is maintained then and builds up throughout the rest of the day if you're staying on there all day. And this leads to the people feeling sort of frazzled at the end of the day, exhausted, super tired. So breaks are really important, and try to use the together mode in Teams. That really helps. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, like, it's really interesting. One of the things that we haven't made kind of published publicly yet is that we've also looked at what happens when you don't have your video on. And what we find is that people also have high degree of concentration, but it tends to wax and wane with the conversation. So if the discussion's about something that you're maybe not pertinent to you at that very moment, you tend to sort of not focus your attention on as hard. So your attention goes up and down a lot more. And so that's a little bit less fatiguing than to have sustained staring at everybody on the screen all the time. So.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, together mode. I love it. It's actually really very fun as well, kind of coming back to bringing fun into the workplace. I'm going to challenge everybody on the line to check out together mode, because it will give you a giggle and make you feel like you are in the room with people. So for me, as a person, with a mental health condition, I'm very similarly, I block times on my calendar. So I will go in and literally have 3 to 5 15-minute breaks throughout the day to simply stand up, stretch, get water, pet my dog, and make sure that I'm getting just that little break. But I also want to remind people that we have to disconnect to recharge. So I use my analytics as a way to really understand my behavior. And so within my analytics, you get a purple square for when you successfully do not go back online after hours, and you can set your own hours. And so I've used that as a way to keep myself honest. It is now a way that my husband helps me keep myself honest, which is like, so did you get the purple square today? So that I can actually be present when I am home and not constantly checking my device. And in fact, now it's become a conversation with my manager. Well, they will also ping me and say, get a purple square, which means you're doing a great job. Get the downtime that you need. So I do think it is, upon all of us to think about creating those boundaries, right? Be connected, take the breaks you need, and then disconnect at the end of the evening to get the self-care that everybody is really looking for, as we know that work days have and work weeks have elongated as we've worked from home. So I want to turn it to the Q&A and see if there are any questions coming from the audience.
Sure, I have a few here. I have one that asks, in terms of hard of hearing people who do not sign, how has Teams been able to assist?
Yeah, Leah, do you want to take that one?
Sure. For people who don't use sign language, but who do use Teams to communicate, one of my favorite things in that case would be the chat channel. It's just the best. I mean, I'm old enough to be from an era when we used instant messenger all the time. I mean, I am AIM specifically. And when that fell out of fashion, it was sad. I missed it because I wanted a way to talk to people without being stressed out and wondering if people were understanding me and having to work hard to engage in a conversation. Instant messenger chat was a perfect middle ground for that. And I would say it's amazing because it's accessible to people even with visual disabilities as well. So you can chat with a person who has a visual disability, being deaf, and being in a completely different disability category, really opposite ends of a spectrum. Yet you can communicate. Whereas when you were in person, you have to work harder to connect with each other. Whereas now with chat, it's really effortless in that way. And I realize now that's one of the reasons that I really like Teams, because Teams is really a beast when it comes to over communication. You know, we have chat, we have multiple channels, we've got multiple ways, we got video calls, we've got so many ways to connect with people. So I would say Teams is really valuable in terms of accessibility.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I have to also, talk about live captions. So now we've got live captions embedded within Teams.
Yep.
You can turn it on individually, which is something I also like. Is, disclosing your disability is a very personal choice. And so there are some people who may be hard of hearing who have not said anything to colleagues. And maybe they're not ready. And so being able to turn on that kind of accessible technology creates an environment and a culture in which we see disability as a strength. We give different ways of communicating, and we allow people the personal room to do that. And also, the one thing I always say is that we also have live caption in PowerPoint. So make sure the next time you give a presentation, you've got that turned on. Because what we know is that people just literally remember more of what you say when they can follow along with different modalities. So maybe hearing your voice, seeing your facial expressions, and following along. And so that's the beauty of inclusive design. Fantastic. Next question.
Sure. How can those with hearing disabilities be better integrated into conference calls where videos aren't used?
Wow, Leah, this is another question for you. You've sparked the imagination of our listeners and viewers.
Sure. So that one, it's a good question, because I did forget to mention this in the beginning, in the earlier comments, is that hearing people or people without a disability have a large role to play in creating an accessible environment. So again, I will say lean in, really lean in by engaging, by checking in with people. If it happens that you have a person with disabilities on your team, check in. Don't hold back, don't withdraw. Check in, engage, connect, make the effort, work with them, talk with them, of course, over the chat channel. So just, my comment here really is to lean into Teams, into your team. And the important thing here is, be a good team member.
Yeah, we've got a lot of shaking heads on this end of the line, which is yes, lean in, ask questions, bring your empathetic curiosity to the table. I think we have time for one more question if we can give it a short answer.
Megan,
oh yes, Alexa, please chime in.
Yeah, I'd love to actually address, I saw some questions about like engaging with the autism community and folks who are, not neurotypical in terms of meetings, which is not my disability, but we've gotten a lot of really great feedback from some folks in the autism community that for them, it really, as Leah said, it's really about that checking in, because for some folks, eye contact is not a thing. And for some folks, having the camera on does not work for them, or they need to be able to get up or move around. And so that check-in where you can really engage with people and say, hey, it's okay to do what you need to do. We're going to trust that you know what works best for you. I think that level of trust that people are doing what works best for them is something that can be overlooked. And I would really just encourage folks to, as Leah said, connect, just ask what works best for people.
So it's incredibly hard to believe that we've already come to the end of our session. I truly believe we could do another 30 minutes of great Q&A. So I want to thank everybody for taking the time to think about disability inclusion, accessibility, and how technology plays a role. And do make sure that you are asking questions, being curious, and making sure that you're getting the time you need for your own self-care. So with that, have a great rest of your conference, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.